to Chiara and to is not with the media legislation with the help of the Council of Europe. I would like to create a code about the cultural heritage, but we understand that the current parliament doesn't have time for this, but we would like, together with the ministry, with Vladislav Karandeev and his colleagues who joined us here in this project, because it has to be our common work, and it will be like that. There are certain ideas concerning certain prepared bills and legislative acts which need to be fine-tuned. And with such a great team, and I understand not only the three of us sitting here at this table, let's say at the head of the table, we would be sitting like together with you, but when we were counting the places, we understood that it is impossible that we all sit at one table. So we were put here at the head table, but we see this project as a four-lateral project. UNESCO, the ministry, our committee and the deputies, the parliamentaries, and Ukrainian experts and public organizations from Ukraine who are active in this field. I hope that we will achieve the goals that we set. I hope that we will be successful in implementing certain things in form of laws within the time of this current parliament. Something will be inherited by the people who come after us, who will be in the 10th version of Ukrainian parliament, we will transfer it to the coming committee, not to do the same mistakes that were done in Ukraine before, that the institutional memory and institutional tradition doesn't get lost. That you can say that in Ukraine there is a long-term policy in preserving, protecting, and using cultural heritage. Do not understand anything bad when I say using heritage, because the heritage has to work in order a identity, national identity is formed, and the horizon of this policy cannot be limited with the term of 5 years. It has to be a long-term policy. It has to be foreseeable that everybody who is participating in it, the scientists, the opinion leaders, the experts, museum workers, etc., that everybody understands that our goals in the long perspective, they are formulated and we are moving towards them. Herewith, I would like to end my introduction. I hope that I have characterized from the point of view of our committee how we started this project and what goals did we set. Now I'm transferring the word to our partner, to Mr. Karandeev, to the Ministry of Culture. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear Signora Dezzi Bardeschi, everybody who joined us in this room through the means of online presence and also joining us spiritually on the work on the tasks of preservation of the cultural heritage. We are the caring people, and the initiative that came from our specialized committee from Verkhovna Rada will be heard and understood by us, and logically the ministry as a central body of executive authority will not just be present as a body that is enforcing the laws, but is going to generate new legislative narratives, new proposals, and propose them to the Verkhovna Rada for legitimization. Dear colleagues, indeed, one of the key words in the preparation of this our meeting is the need of systematization of the legislation. Systematization not on general grounds of norms, but according to the norms enacted today in the European Union, where we are moving according to the decisions of the government of Ukraine, not only through the signing of agreements with other governments, but also in the principle of decision-making of the things we are judged by and that influence our daily life. They have certain procedures, certain frames that every public servant has to be governed by, and also all the people in the society. And we are talking about it, that the decisions that need to be met in Ukraine by the central authorities, institutions that take care of the cultural heritage, the decisions that will be met by the public and the public society, they have to be prescribed clearly and normalized by our legislative acts. As of today, we can see several models that will be the foundation of the future code, or let's say different approaches to the modernization of the legislation. The first model is quite simple. It is based on the fact that we have certain types of heritage that need clear, targeted attention. Material, immaterial heritage, movable, immovable heritage. A lot of documents exist that systematize these relationships, but I agree that except for preservation and protection, an important aspect is using. Because why do you preserve and store heritage when they when this heritage doesn't work for the society and does not work for achieving the goals that we need and do not correspond to the work with our cultural heritage. That's why the question of usage is very important in the context of the legislation that has been mentioned in the press release. We should also add the law on the museums and museum management, because museums are the institutions that bring the educational narrative of the cultural heritage to the Ukrainian society. I believe that the question of immaterial heritage will need additional attention. Just recently, we marked the anniversary of the Convention on Protection of the Immaterial Heritage, but we still do not have the law. We had a long-lasting discussion if we need it, but it is obvious that we do need it today, because the challenges of the war have opened this immaterial cultural heritage as one of the most important aspects of forming the cultural identity and the treatment of our past and forming the main narratives of the nation, the narratives for forming our resistance spirit and circling out Ukrainian nation and Ukrainian traditions among other nations and traditions, which allows us to see ourselves as a unique nation that is worth existing on the palette of international political, ethnical maps, and we prove it by our rich culture, including the immaterial heritage. Dear colleagues, I'm very glad that our reliable partner in all the processes is UNESCO and the representative office of UNESCO in Ukraine. I'm grateful to you, Chiara, for so much attention to the question of the cultural heritage among all other processes which are in your attention. Your support, including the financial support and the management of the grant funds for implementation of the and solving of the current problems, are valued very much by the government, by the public, and I would like to ask you to be same attentive to us and to continue helping us as you did it before. I would like to express my gratitude to the European institutes that have supported the important RESCOL project. One of the objectives of this is developing a strategy of Ukrainian culture, especially in the part of improving the regulative part of our work. And the colleagues who now are part of the professional team of RESPOL will continue working, and I am sure that they will allow us to approach the question of improving the heritage legislation even better, not only through the analysis of the problems and of the challenges that we are facing, but also through provision of practical recommendation, which is extremely important. Let's be honest. Today, we have the general problem of institutional self-sufficiency. We need support. We need support with experts, and having these experts from among public organizations, scientific institutions, through projects financed by our international partners are a very important help that the government needs. So big thanks to everybody supporting the projects for improvement of Ukrainian legislation. It is an important vector of our development of the system of culture as it is, and every person that has the experience will be gladly accepted by the ministry and other governmental organizations as an expert, as important factor for generating needed proposals, and most of all, their implementation in the very important direction as of today, which is preserving the cultural heritage. The idea is great. Thank you very much, Mykyta, for the leadership in this project and in this process. The Ministry of Culture is your reliable partner, and all our entire intellectual potential will be aimed at cooperation with you for meeting the most important decisions for Ukrainian culture. Thank you, Ruslan. I would like to say that this project has a female leadership, and we are more here helping the wonderful women who initiated this process and moved it from the very beginning. I would like to invite one of these women to join us. She is on a distant business trip, my colleague and deputy in the committee, Yevgenia Kravchuk. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, colleagues. Receiving the ball from Mykyta, I will have to explain why I am not with you in the Ukraine Forum Room, but I'm in New York. I'm working with the 68th UNESCO Commission on the situation of women, but indeed it can be carried out despite the time difference and thanks to online communication. I would like just to remind and to return maybe some 6 months back when this idea arrived. It was on a forum organized jointly with UNESCO, Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, and USAID about the cultural heritage protection. And when speaking there at the stage, I addressed the partners, our international partners, and our public, saying that the committee would like to make another big project because we have just passed the legislation on media, and we were ready to actively start working with the code of laws for the cultural heritage. But if not that now, then updating and synchronizing the legislation, and not only updating the laws that we do have now, but also accepting and passing the new laws that we need that are still missing, like Ruslan mentioned about the non-material heritage. And afterwards, before this project has been announced, Chiara will tell you more details, I hope, on her side, on the side of UNESCO, but we are aimed at a practical result. It's not only analysis of the legislation, but also the passing of legislation. It is important that we need to take into account in our concept that the ratification of the convention is to happen. The Nicosia Convention, and it is a new document, and it is connected to the violations in the sphere of cultural heritage. If we speak about the heritage protection, this topic is already in our security agreements. It has been mentioned a good paragraph or even several paragraphs with our security agreement with the Netherlands, and this makes me happy. We have also the reference to the Hague Convention of 1974. It will be 70, we will celebrate like 70 years of it soon, and it also concerns the situation with the cultural heritage in war conflicts. I can see that Mr. Dmytro Koval is going to speak later, and it's maybe a question to him if we have enough international tools to protect our heritage throughout this aggressive war. And additionally, I would like to add that I'm already preparing the Council of Europe document about the cultural identity during the war. And according to the recommendation of the international law, and I hope it will also be passed, I would like to invite colleagues and experts to join me in this. I have mentioned a lot of laws that need to be updated or amended, And I would like to pay particular attention to the fact that there are certain formulations already that have been discussed in a broader circle, but we want maximal participation of international experts from UNESCO. We are speaking about the law on archaeology and amending it. We would love to work our ideas through the filter and additional experience of our colleagues that work in the NGO sector, in the public organizations, the lawyers especially working there. We can be mentioning like a lot of laws. I also agree that the law on museums also need amending, and which is also important, new tools, as well as like, you know, that the libraries are not only storages of books, and museums cannot be just some storage places for exponents, for artifacts. We have faced the problem of evacuation during the war of artifacts of heritage, and it has to be discussed additionally, maybe to make a panel or a round table, a discussion that could be added. And at the very end, as for me, it is very important to pay attention to the fact that the protection of the cultural heritage needs lobbyism, not only in the legislative field, but strong positions in the executive authorities, because it has to be a system of withholding. And for example, if you take into account that some ministry is responsible for construction, we need also an executive authority that will be protecting the cultural heritage. And we need additional discussion with the colleagues from the Ministry of Infrastructure on the recovering of Ukraine during the war and after the war, because there are also projects that are being started. And what the philosophy behind it has to be. Is it just reconstruction as it was? Because it cannot be suitable for all the sites. It is also a question for a broad public discussion. That is why I'm very glad that we are on such a practical stage and we are approaching it. And I would like to invite you all to actively participate. I understand that there is certain skepticism, and I know that you have been hearing it for years, that people promise you a lot of new laws, but it is a long way that is set up by small steps, and this first step needs to be made. Thank you. Thank you, Yevgenia. Now I would like to transfer to the floor to another initiator of this project, to Chiara. Please, the floor is yours.
Добрий день. I will ask my colleague Jana to translate in for now already several, I would say years already, so maybe it's not need for translation. We will do it in English. So.
Вітаю, з вашого дозволу, я скористаюся перекладом своєї колеги. Багатьох з вас я вже знаю особисто, мені дуже приємно всіх сьогодні бачити.
Greetings, many of you I know personally. Maybe the translation is not even needed, but let it be present of the protocol.
Head of the committee of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine for Humanitarian and Information Policy, deputy head for here and really, and colleagues, friends, experts. And I'm particularly delighted to be here today in this important meeting together, and which represent in a way, I would say, the first consultation around the need to initiate a thorough, legal analysis and systematization of national governing the protection of cultural property in Ukraine to ensure alignment with the international agreements.
Шановний пане голово Комітету Верховної Ради України з питань гуманітарної та інформаційної політики, шановний пане міністре культури, шановні учасники, колеги, мені надзвичайно приємно відкривати сьогодні цей захід. Це надзвичайно важлива зустріч, яка, по суті, є першою консультацією щодо проблем і потреб у правовому аналізі та систематизації національних нормативних актів, які регулюють охорону культурних цінностей в Україні, для гармонізації з відповідними міжнародними стандартизованими інструментами.
So the head of the committee and the deputy has already, the minister already explained how this process has started. So it started already in autumn 2003. Already we started with some initial preparatory work for this process. And so we are glad now, like actually this is materialized today with this very first consultative step.
Як вже зазначали, власне, колеги, цей процес розпочався раніше, у жовтні 2023 року, а сьогодні ми бачимо практичне втілення наших задумів і разом запускаємо, по суті, цю ініціативу.
So since the full-scale invasion in February 22, UNESCO has been assisting Ukrainians, institutions and people in protecting cultural heritage with a dual approach. On one side, to work on emergency protection and prevention of protection of monuments, also in view of increasing the protection in terms of prevention. And on the other side, on livelihood of artists, investing in skills and in professionals in the country.
З моменту повномасштабного вторгнення в Україну 24 лютого 2022 року ЮНЕСКО надає допомогу українцям, а також українським інституціям, маючи такий подвійний підхід у своїй роботі. З одного боку, це фізичний захист спадщини у екстрених надзвичайних ситуаціях, а з іншого боку, це підтримка митців і професіоналів, підтримка їхньої діяльності, їхніх засобів до існування та зміцнення їх роботи.
We have all witnessed an increase in repeated attacks to cultural heritage. I would just to recall that today UNESCO has verified, and we speak only about verified cases, 346 damaged buildings across the country. And UNESCO has, as you know, further strongly condemns the repeated attacks to against cultural heritage, including world heritage properties, and has recalled the need to respect and adhere to international law, for which intentional, I repeat, intentional destruction of cultural sites may amount to war crime.
Ну і, власне, всі ми стали і є свідками постійних нападів на об'єкти культурної спадщини, на культуру. ЮНЕСКО верифікує і станом на сьогодні вже верифікувало пошкодження 304 346 об'єктів було вже пошкоджено станом на сьогодні, і ЮНЕСКО неодноразово засуджувало офіційно і засуджує ці постійні атаки на культурну спадщину, включно з атаками на об'єкти всесвітньої спадщини, а також нагадувало про необхідність поважати та дотримуватися міжнародного права, згідно з яким навмисне знищення культурних об'єктів може становити військовий злочин.
And let me recall that this year it's recording the anniversary of the 1954 Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the context of armed conflict. And this will be also one of the convention that will be later on taken as example by Dmytro Koval in his presentation. So it's also a very important, I would say, coincidence in a way that we start this important moment also in this context.
І також нагадаю, що цього року ми, власне, відзначаємо річницю Конвенції 1954 року про захист культурної спадщини у збройних конфліктах. І ми, власне, розглядатимемо також цю конвенцію пізніше. Зокрема, наш колега Дмитро Коваль буде говорити про неї. І цікаво, що такий, може бути, збіг обставин, але дуже релевантний для нас сьогодні.
So the war, we all know, is having a very deep impact on the cultural sector at large, but beyond wartime is also even, we all realize how the sector is even more essential today than ever. And we all recognize the important role of culture in this society, in building community ties and preparing and to initiate and launch recovery and reconstruction of the country. And this is going beyond the immediate, I would say, benefit that we see in the short term.
Війна має глибокий критичний вплив на культурний сектор загалом, а це надзвичайно важливо, оскільки саме культура і сектор культури є надзвичайно необхідним для суспільства загалом. Він допомагає створювати і посилювати зв'язки між суспільством та його членами. Він сприяє стійкості людей, соціальній згуртованості, і він має різні довгострокові наслідки, які, можливо, ми не можемо побачити відразу або навіть спланувати на найшвидший період, але вони матимуть значення довший час по тому.
So we recognize the important steps that has been already initiated in terms of revising, improving the legal framework, in particular in translating and aligning with international standard, the international treaties ratified by Ukraine, among which the UNESCO Convention, but also the Council of Europe conventions and recommendations, which are crucial for a process that the country is currently going on, also in the light of the accession to EU, which is a process that started in negotiation since December.
І ми, звісно ж, визнаємо великий шлях, який вже був пройдений державою, а також експертами, зокрема у модернізації і у узгодженні різноманітних міжнародних актів, включно з конвенціями, зокрема конвенціями Ради Європи, і особливо звертаємо на це увагу, враховуючи шлях України до приєднання до Європейського Союзу.
So UNESCO stands ready to assist and to fulfill the request of assistance by Ukraine in this very important endeavor. And in fact, as has been mentioned by Yevgenia very quickly, that beside this meeting with the project, it's a concrete project. It's a concrete project which is articulated over a 1-year time frame as the very first short-term results, but of course, which is opening for more long-term. And I will give you a very quick now explanation about what this consists of.
І, власне, ЮНЕСКО підтверджує свою відданість підтримці України у її шляху до гармонізації законодавства у сфері культури. І, власне, сьогодні ми починаємо практичний підхід і шлях до цього, і я дам невеличкий опис наших кроків.
So in this effort to assist for the legal analysis and systematization of normative national acts governing the sector of culture and cultural protection and safeguarding, in consultation with the partner, we are launching a call for proposals for technical contribution and guidance in this process, in particular with an objective to support the reform and enforcing cultural-related legislation, starting with the reform of a set of law to cultural heritage protection through a staggered approach. So the first is really to work on this call will be open till the 5th of April. And it's a call which consists of the first step. Two partners are invited to accomplish a series of staggered steps. As I said, the first is to conduct a comprehensive legal analysis on the state of normative acts governing the protection and safeguarding of the cultural heritage, with the view really to identify bottleneck issues, priorities, on which there is a need to have a narrow focus with a very short term, and based on that to develop as a second step a program with milestones over short, medium and long term, in order to have possibly is as objective to reach a code of cultural heritage protection, ideally, with and as a third step, a focus and a narrowed focus on two more critical and crucial draft laws that are considered critical to advance in the process. As the head of the Commission has mentioned, we all know that law, it's a longer process. And in this sense, to adopting this staggered step and to start with a focus specifically of on one or two sectors, which is considered more critical in this moment, will enable to initiate a process and also to build upon, but still within a already clarified and shared. And this is very important because this process, it's a participatory process in a way, shared framework, which is actually giving the vision and the operational steps. So ideally within 1 year to reach this through consultations, through working groups, to reach a draft law, two draft laws that can be ready after consultation with the committee for the submission and possibly voting. So said this, let me conclude to thank you all, because beside this first consultation, there is, as you can see, really already a very practical consultation is key to receive your feedback and also suggestion, orientations. So this is not the only opportunity that we will have. We will have several others, and it's good to start. It's necessary, I would say, to start with enhancing this inclusive and participatory process. And thank you very much for being here and for your valuable contribution. Thank you. Дякую.
Thank you. Sorry. Будь ласка.
Дякую. Отже, це буде довгий переклад. Отже, сьогоднішній захід слугуватиме збору експертних консультацій щодо поточного стану законодавчої бази, яка зараз існує, а також пріоритетів і певних прогалин у правовій реформі цієї галузі. І, власне, ЮНЕСКО хоче принагідно офіційно оголосити відкритий конкурс пропозицій під назвою «Правовий аналіз і систематизація національних нормативних актів, що регулюють охорону культурних цінностей для гармонізації з відповідними міжнародними інструментами». І етапи цього конкурсу будуть наступні. Його метою буде підтримка реформування та впровадження законодавства, пов'язаного з культурою, починаючи з реформування набору законів, що пов'язані з захистом та охороною культурної спадщини. По-перше, провести комплексний правовий аналіз стану нормативних актів, що поточно регулюють охорону культурної спадщини, з метою виявлення проблем, які виникають у нормативно-правовій базі. Потрібно буде розробити детальну пропозицію щодо чіткого плану роботи, спрямованого на реформування законодавства у цій галузі, для того, щоб в подальшому це призвело до прийняття комплексного кодексу культурної спадщини для країни. Потрібно буде визначити 2 сфери для реформування, а також протягом терміну до 1 року запропонувати 2 законопроекти, які будуть розроблені спільно з консультаціями з міністерством, з комітетом, і будуть ними разом. Так, і це перша річ між нами, вона не остання далеко, їх буде більше для подальших обговорень, для консультацій, для того, щоб поділитися експертним досвідом, тому що мета полягає також у тому, щоб створити середовище для обговорення, яке заохоче зв'язок і врахує всі точки зору зацікавлених сторін. Отже, важніше отримати фідбек, отримати вашу експертну думку, напрямна і надзвичайно цінна сьогодні, а також у подальшому. Я вдячна вам за можливість зустрітися, за присутність сьогодні, а також рада, що сьогодні ми починаємо цю надзвичайно важливу ініціативу разом.
And I would like to give the floor to Arturo Ranov, who is the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear Mykyta, dear Rostislav, dear Chiara, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Secretariat of the National Commission of Ukraine for UNESCO, which is located in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for hosting this event and for having this initiative, which, in my opinion, is highly symbolic because it starts in the year when Ukraine will celebrate the 70th anniversary of its membership in UNESCO. Over 70 years, Ukraine has initiated many things in this organization in UNESCO, so it's rather logical that UNESCO is now helping Ukraine in the implementation of this project we are discussing, which is related to enhancing and reinforcing national legislation in the field of cultural heritage protection. Since the very first days of the war, UNESCO has really been very active in supporting Ukraine, and it keeps supporting Ukraine. It is thanks to diplomatic efforts that on the UNESCO platform, more than, I guess, 50 declarations and statements have been made to support Ukraine. The Executive Council, the Executive Board of UNESCO, which is one of the management bodies, has approved an important decision to help Ukraine, including to help Ukraine financially in overcoming the results of the Russian aggression. And we are really grateful for this to the organization which is generally supporting this process. And as Chiara has mentioned, our request for help still needs to be voiced. So I'm sure that at the next meeting of the Executive Board, that has already been started in UNESCO. We will repeat our request once again, and we will ask to support Ukraine in the process that has been launched. I wish all of us good luck on that way, and thank you. Thank you, Artur. So, colleagues, let's go over to the working part of our meeting, and let me give the floor for the presentation dedicated to the improvement of the implementation of national legislation related to cultural heritage protection in Ukraine. Let me give the floor to Dmytro Koval. He is the lecturer of the Department of International and European Law of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. He is legal director of Truth Hunts. So he is a well-known Ukrainian lawyer. So please, over to you, Dmytro. Thank you, Mykyta, and I'm happy to be here among all of you. Thanks a lot to the Ministry and to UNESCO for initiating this event, which is the launching step, because a lot is still ahead of us in terms of improvement of Ukrainian legislation. So let me start with a little bit cooling words related to international law. We shouldn't expect to measure international law, because the limits are related to the fact that the international law was created to make it possible to have some cooperation between the states and not to replace national legislation. Well, certainly a number of issues related to cultural heritage protection have to be regulated nationally, and they cannot be regulated at the international level. Work that needs to be taken into account when we are developing national legislation on cultural heritage protection. So let me show you a small scheme in small font, but this is a kind of a key triangle in international covenants and agreements related to cultural heritage protection, which is Convention of the year 1954. All of you know very well it's Convention on the protection of cultural heritage in armed conflicts, and the Convention of 1970 about cultural values, and the 72 about protection of cultural and national heritage. This is the core triangle that constitutes the basis for the regulation in this field at the international level. We all know that there is also a long list of other conventions, both at the UNESCO level and at the level of the Council of Europe. And these are conventions that fit well into this triangle, and they're related to cultural heritage protection. But I will be talking about those three basic conventions, and I will show you what is there regarding implementation and regarding state commitments. So let's take the Hague Convention and two protocols of the year 54 and 1999. So one of the core elements in the implementation, according to the Hague Convention and protocols, is criminalization of significant or serious, which is in the English version, the term used there, violations of Protocol 2 and the Convention itself. That is the commitment that shows us that Ukraine, at the national criminal code level, should envisage some punishment for some types of violations related to cultural values, and they are broken down into two blocks. One block should be supported with a criminal response on behalf of the state, and the other unit has to be accompanied by some response on behalf of the state. These are the violations of Article 21, Protocol 2. And if I'm talking about some response, that depends on the state and what the state considers to be necessary to criminalize at the state level. This is the term legal measures that presupposes that these could be the ones related to the criminal field, criminal law, and some other fields. And that's interesting because, taking into account our circumstances, we probably need to do a little bit more than the minimum suggested by the protocol. We need to think it over how to criminalize some of the things envisaged by this article, like the use of cultural heritage against the purposes of its designation or in violation of its integrity, of its historical importance. That's what we see in the territories that are in occupation, and that's something that we cannot respond to in terms of legislation because we have not implemented this article as yet. What else is important here, and what else is envisioned by this convention as one of the implementation steps towards the implementation of those protocols and the convention itself? This is adding the norms related to cultural heritage protection to the special guidelines that are developed for the armed forces. We do have this guidance. It has been updated. It was updated in 2015, but it's being in the process of updating now as well. But it doesn't contain a lot of reflections concerning the commitments under the convention. For example, it says nothing about special protection, nothing at all. Though this is the protection that Ukraine has used recently to add a number of the sites of cultural heritage and other things that are not well regulated. So there is a lot of room for perfection. And by the way, this is a bylaw, which means that we could quickly interfere into it and amend it. Updated recommendations concerning the procedure for evacuating cultural values. You know that this is one of the major challenges Ukraine faced when the Russian aggression came and when the full-scale invasion was launched, because we needed to evacuate cultural values, and the legislative framework on which this evacuation is based is rather weak. First of all, it connects armed conflicts with natural disasters, but we understand that the principles and the approaches to evacuating those two contexts are absolutely different. And besides that, it does not give a clear answer. It is not an instruction. It's just a reference to some of the legislative acts. And, well, it fits well into the Ukrainian legislative tradition with all those references made and providing no clear prescriptions. But it makes our life different and our decisions in terms of evacuation more difficult. But this is a part of commitments of Ukraine under Protocol 2, because the protocol, unlike the convention, clarifies the events, the measures that needs to be taken before the beginning of the conflict, and one of them is development of the evacuation plans. And the register of real estate and immovable cultural heritage sites. Well, the Ministry of Culture is already bored and tired of this topic, but this is the topic that shows us how well we can really protect our cultural heritage. When we're talking about the 1970 convention, one of the points in this convention is regulation. It should be repatriation there, but we're talking about restitution here, which is really there in the text of the convention. It's just my addition, repatriation. So this is the commitment related not just to this convention, but to Protocol 1 of the Convention of 1954, because the norms are there, but they have a different conflict, because in case of the protocol, it's completion of the armed conflict, but in the Convention of 1970, it's not necessarily the armed conflict. Now, the Ukrainian legislation does not regulate restitution as such, and it was about 7 years ago that the Ministry of Culture revised this legislation in terms of restitution, and I would say that the initiatives discussed were rather progressive, but now they are only to a certain extent implemented in the systems, which seemingly do not enable the states to which the values have been relocated in violation of the laws to act. But at the same time, they give a source of getting the values back for the state from which those values come from. It's like long-term lease, or it's agreements of holding exhibitions with the reverse right of getting these values for short-term exhibitions from the country to which the values are given back. So quite a lot of actions for this restitution and repatriation, for regulating it. And it seems to me that Ukrainian should be a pioneer here, and it should be on the basis of our experience that the country should start developing international law in this domain. Archaeological excavations. The Convention of 1970 does not suggest a law as far as model provisions, so legislative acts are concerned. And all in all, those model provisions could be divided into two groups, those related to archaeologies and those related to cultural sites. I would say that formally Ukraine has implemented the requirements of those model acts rather well, but Mykyta has mentioned it today, and we can hear it at every single forum, that archaeological activity is not regulated enough because we have this black archaeology and removal of the sites abroad. So we are facing challenges, and it's all about monitoring and revision of the work of the application of this legislation, where we have failures and where it works well. Then integration of the registers of cultural values with international basis. This is also one of the requirements, not exactly of the convention, but of the implementation comments to it. And the idea is that for us to be able to look for the illegally exported sites or objects, we need to have clear databases and clear mechanisms of transferring this data to other stakeholders that are somehow involved in the process of searching for those cultural values. This is also one of the points which was not under discussion in Ukraine, but now that's something that we are supposed to do for the convention to be implemented. Then improvement of protection of newly identified objects and the register of cultural values under occupation. Well, it's not within the convention, but it follows common sense and the spirit of the convention. And that's really a very important thing, because all those who had something to do with this domain do realize how difficult it is for Ukraine to understand what we have lost as a result of occupation, what is being exported from those occupied territories, because the registers were decentralized, and the beginning of work at least something that we know, and making this common register would be a very important thing to do. And I will conclude with the Convention on the Protection of World Cultural and Natural Heritage, which contains not that many implementation requirements, but Ukraine in 2018 actually implemented most of them when it changed its legislation and introduced the notion of the World Cultural Heritage Site. And there were some provisions introduced concerning its monitoring and protection following the UNESCO requirements. So that's what we did in 2018, at least formally. But there are a number of things that, as it seems to me, and the experts also say this, are a challenge. One of them is getting international assistance. International assistance may come to Ukraine following several ways. And suppose the 1970 convention presupposes that technical assistance could be provided to the states which are participants or members of the convention, and Protocol 2 of the Convention of 1954 also suggests this. But another option is when UNESCO is just a kind of a mediator for this technical assistance that is provided for Ukraine, but via UNESCO. And there are some problems with getting this assistance locally by the institutions that are most in need of it. And I think that all those, both from UNESCO, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Culture, who have been involved in this procedure since 2022, know how difficult it is to really make use of this assistance and how many misunderstandings may arise when we are talking about using the money which is allocated. So that is kind of streamlining. We need to have a transparent setting for the work of this system of getting international assistance. That is something Ukraine needs badly. And here is another issue raised in relation to this convention, that is the issue of monitoring and evaluation. So monitoring, this is the word that we may find in our legislative act on the cultural heritage protection, but nevertheless, it's considered that this is not exactly the monitoring that the convention meant. So we need to have some update and revision of how monitoring should be exercised and what institutions should be in charge of it. Because the policymakers should not be in charge of monitoring. There must be some external actors that are engaged in monitoring. So let me wrap up with this, and I will be happy to participate in our further discussion. Thank you, Dmytro. And let me give the floor right away for the presentation to Mariana Toman, Director of the Department of Cultural Heritage from the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine. Mariana, over to you.
Я прошу звернути увагу на візуалізацію до цього
Let me
слайду.
draw your attention to the visual representation of this slide because, well, first of all, this is the basis of the collection that will be exhibited. This is something that came back to us from the Netherlands. And in this visualization, we have used the works that will be exhibited in the National Treasury. And this is something that represents the status of our cultural heritage. All the issues related to this domain have not occurred now. They have a long history of their origin, and that is something we all are responsible for. Right, we do understand that Russia is killing us, trying to kill, first of all, our identity. And something that comes after people, after humans, is our identity, because it confirms our existence as a nation, as a people, as a community. So this is the main value of cultural heritage. That is where this main value lies. And what is important here is that cultural heritage, our cultural heritage, is definitely a component of the world cultural heritage. This is something that positions us in the world as a cultural and civilized democratic country. That's why if we are trying to launch this process of updating legislation, we need to realize the historical importance of this process, because law is just a theoretical tool for extremely important processes. And when we come to realize this, we will be happy to get engaged in this process. I'm happy that the process has been launched. And I know that when some amendments were submitted, and Mykyta, Poturaev, Yevgenia, Kravchuk were engaged in this process. So they submitted those amendments about half a year ago. This was amendment number 1972. It was about including cultural heritage into the fundamental basic interest of Ukraine, and thus it was all about inclusion of cultural heritage to the law on national security. I think that if we started updating our legislation, well, definitely we will one day reach the point when this information comes to the parliament and they will support this initiative, because that is the starting point and this is a milestone. I will not overload you with a lot of information because I understand that you're so eager to participate in a facilitated discussion, but there are some universal things that really show that we cannot improve something just somewhere in some points, chaotically. And that's the opinion I take as far as our legislation is concerned. Of course, it's easier to update this law, to update that law, to make this or that amendment. But anyway, we will reach the moment when we will need to codify our legislation, which is a tedious process, which requires a lot of analysis. We need to also take into account the context, because we need to have a special concept to update our legislation. We may need years for that. But anyway, when we're talking about restoration, reconstruction, recovery, that's all our responsibility of the experts in this field. And it's important to recognize that our industry is in the process of decay or stagnation. And that is no secret. Everything seems to be wrong, and I mentioned it at the beginning. But now, what is different is that we have a great societal request for changes. People start realizing en masses what we are losing and what we may possibly lose in the future, and what the aggressive state is destroying. So it's no wonder that my next slide shows you this last item related to improvements. I will give all those materials over to you. I will show you the sources of those materials. But when we, with my colleagues, were working on the draft law on cultural heritage, we realized that something that is there is critically too little. So we really need to do a lot. Well, as far as figures are concerned, you can see that I'm not showing any legislation, because it's not about legislation. Things can be systematized in different ways, under different numbers, but this is the integral picture that we have, which means that we have a good opportunity to give new quality to our legislation, and this is something that has been mentioned by Mr. Koval. we are going to be the pioneers, but this is also one of our advantages, and it gives us a horizon of opportunities. And we need to work well in coordination with our managerial bodies, because our management needs to be changed. It needs to be transparent and clear and accountable. So, it's already a lyrical digression, which I would like to conclude my speech with, but the process of updating our legislation in the field of cultural heritage is about very, very responsible things, which are minimum as such, but they at the same time with a maximum load. And we are now waging a semantic war, but for this, we need to have this tectonic framework, legislative framework. Thank you. Thank you, Mariana. Colleagues, let's go over to our discussion. I don't see all of your badges, all of your tables, but I think that we may start. Helena Rorenko. Yes, I was the first one to raise my hand. Thank you, Mykyta. So I'm happy to welcome all of you at this table, and it's really a great pleasure for me that we are now talking about plans, which are ambitious plans for many years ahead. We're not trying just to make quick adjustments and amendments, and at least the committee has mentioned that this is the work not just for their committee, but for their successors. It's important to realize this. It's important for all the participants to realize this. But I would like to mention something that I lack at this meeting. I think that we don't have to convince any of us about the importance of cultural heritage protection, but we forget that we work within the ecosystem of our public administration and state requirements related to state budget funds and costs. And here we critically lack some experts who could really hear us on the one hand, and on the other hand could help us with some changes. And let me give here a small example related to autonomy and decision-making at the level of museums, libraries, reserves, because these are all public budget institutions that have accounts only in the treasury, and in order to engage some technical grants, international grants or international assistance, they have to work with CSOs and invent some additional mechanisms to somehow more or less transparently use this money and implement some projects. So it seems to me that we have this understanding inside our circle, but we need to engage people from the Ministry of Finance and the Budgetary Committee, from the Ministry of Recovery, because, there may be some conflicts between developers and controlling bodies and the constructors and the budget institutions. That is something we cannot avoid in the future. So it would be good if the open call winner, UNESCO open call winner, could actually engage the widest range of experts and people who could really do the things that make it more possible for the institutions to be autonomous, because the actors over the period of these 2 years, the actors in the field of cultural heritage have proven that they are self-sufficient and they really should be helped by the state. And another thing is copyright. We have the law on copyright, but we still don't know how museums could actually monetize their right to own the collections that they have, whether it's generally possible to monetize somehow on the pictures of their sites or not. So this is one of the things that we should work on. And also, it would be good if this was also recognized at the level of the Cabinet of Ministers and the President of Ukraine, because we should not be staying in our bubble. Well, I would agree with almost everything that you have said, but for probably one minor thing that we have experienced, not very positive experience, when, well, we all know that we have this cross-institutional interaction lagging behind in many cases. And sometimes we appear to be in the situations when media lawyers, well, Well, let's talk about the experience of creating one of the complexes. They just sit at one table and they make amendments in the Code of Criminal Procedure or Criminal Procedure, but they don't engage any people from the Ministry of Justice. Because that's our field of work. We just want to introduce some amendments. We know that some things can be implemented only if they are prescribed in the criminal code or the Code of Criminal Procedure, and that's it. And nobody else needs this, just we. That's why we do it on our own. Well, definitely you will have problems later with the approval of these things, but it's not that I'm trying to advocate this policy of closed doors. No, I'm always in favor of inclusivity, but I see that so far the matters in one sector are of interest only for the people who are working in this industry. That's why I'm not that optimistic. But generally, I think that we will all be happy to cooperate here from people from other directions, because we are all open to cooperation. But cooperation is one thing, but relying on somebody coming and doing your job, well, it's something that we shouldn't do. If they come, let's be happy about that. But otherwise, we should rely on our own efforts. Am I sure that they will come? No, I'm not. Okay, colleagues, please. I saw another hand raised, but please introduce yourself because probably not everyone knows you. And stay closer to the microphone, please. This is your microphone, please. So, dear colleagues, Evelina Kravchuk. I'm the expert of the Crimean platform, and I would like to say the following. We faced those problems 10 years ago when we were discussing some issue related to Crimea. So the things that you are now discussing here in relation to the war started being discussed by us in 2015 in relation to Crimea. So we've got a lot of achievements, a lot of publications, a lot of complete results which are present in the information and media field. So I would really urge you to use those materials. So here is the book. That is exactly the book serving as the guidance on the topic of our event, and experts have prescribed the procedure step by step as to what needs to do under the Ukrainian legislation in terms of extinguishing fires, immediate urgency, protection and rescue. This is one thing, so let me hand these materials over to you. It's not actually in public access, in open access. I have a lot of copies of these materials, and I would really be happy if we could cooperate in this direction. As a coordinator of this Crimean platform expert, we would really be happy to join in the development of any other legislative initiative. So this is one thing. The other thing, I've looked through the presentations, but I haven't seen anything about joining other conventions. So this issue is not being raised. Yevgenia Kravchuk raised this issue, but we have UNITRA convention which regulates the issues that we are talking about. This is restitution, bringing things back. It's difficult from a legal point of view, and lawyers don't like it because it's rather complex. But otherwise, if we don't join this convention, we will not be able to settle the issue of restitution and getting our values back, because it's also about private property. Another question is, what is the framework of our work? Do we have to join other conventions, or do we have to work with the things that have already been ratified, because all our further steps depend on this court decision of ours? Well, thank you. And that's what we actually started with. When we had a discussion with Chiara, it was probably our first meeting, and we were sitting in the UNESCO headquarters office, and we were discussing this. We were talking that we need to start with at least getting together all the people whom we know of, or about whom we have a strong suspicion that they have got some achievements in the field. Because it's really true that we don't even have a map, kind of a roadmap of what everyone has. Well, our committee has some materials of different degree of readiness. The ministry had some of the materials, and by the way, sometimes these were different iterations. I mean, we had one iteration, and the ministry had just the other iteration of the same materials. The Crimean platform has got some materials. Some other platforms probably have something else, but we don't have even the map, the list of what has already been prepared, what is there, and what is the degree of readiness of those materials. And you're absolutely right in saying that, yes, we are facing some issues that will predetermine our further movement ahead, and that's why we have actually gathered here. You've been absolutely right in saying this, but we've come here to hear everything. So our task at this stage is to do this, and you can see UNESCO and their practical approach, and you can see how quickly we are moving ahead thanks to them and this practicality of their approach. We are really moving forward to practical steps, but at this stage we need to have all the documents on one table, and we need to have all people who have something to offer to gather at that table and to have a discussion. That's how it's going to work. Please introduce yourself again, because again, I'm sorry, probably I don't know all of your surnames and I cannot see the names. Yulia Vahanova, director of the Karandeev Museum. So it would be good if we made one step further now and predetermined what cultural heritage is for us and why we are preserving it. It seems to me that this is the fundamental thing that will predetermine all our further steps. We'll understand that this needs to be protected, but why we are doing this, we need to formulate this. Unless we formulate this, we won't move any further, because now cultural heritage still traditionally refers to the so-called leisure or entertainment, and we don't have any declaration. Well, we have the declaration that this is national security, but this is just a declaration and not the official statement. And I would support Halina Gregorenko that we need to coordinate with other ministries and stakeholders, and this should not be just something we are interested in and for which we would be developing laws. That's about understanding in the society what exactly we are preserving and protecting and what cultural values these are. Then it's going to be easier for us to talk about restitution and getting things back. And the other issue is the issue of management, because everything that we're going to develop needs to be done locally by the institutions that exist locally. And if we don't have this democratic budgetary process and management process for the local level, well, these institutions will not become subject entities, and they will not be able to perform, to implement the strategies that we develop together with you now, today, or gradually with time. And we need to support this level, local level of people who could actually be the implementing agents. Thank you. Well, I cannot but to agree with you. You know, in the year 2020, I had a talk with the head of one of the national museums, and I asked him an innocent question, and he told me that if we start selling something, I will have tax agents coming to me, controlling bodies coming to me, the State Investigations Bureau will come to my place, and then I will be imprisoned. So I agree with this. And by the way, today we have a unique opportunity, because in Verkhovna Rada, in the second reading, there will soon be the law on the Holodomor Museum. And I think that it will be adopted. I hope very much. I don't think that we have any chances that it will not be adopted. And this will be a real precedent, because in Ukraine we will get a museum institution related to the Holodomor, to the famine, and we, with Ruslan, have a special plan because we don't want this institution to be a unique one. We want this institution just to be the first one that will be replicated. So it's everything like we have it with people. And I think that we will manage to do this, but again, this is one of the segments of what we are now talking about. And you're absolutely right. But we may take different pathways. We can regulate our activity, or otherwise, this will not definitely require a specific definition from us, because we know the countries where you can actually register in the museum everything that can be registered. So we should take into account that museum heritage is a part of the cultural heritage of our country. So that's something that we should be taking care of. But you're right that we need to talk about this, because that's exactly what our colleague from the Crimean platform mentioned. That's about having a conceptual approach. Are we going this way or are we going that way? And I can see that Ruslan wants to have his say. Thank you, Mykyta. So far, to speak more globally, it's not only 16 laws that Mariana has found and has recognized as the ones that affect the field of cultural heritage. We should also be talking about the decrees of presidents and bylaws. And one of such laws, UK's decrees of the year 1996 has been mentioned by passing by Mykyta. This is the decree that predetermined, well, not the management components, but a kind of the essence of cultural institutions. I mean supervisory boards in cultural institutions, and the upgrading that will hopefully take place in the recent future concerning the work of the National Museum of the Holodomor and Genocide will be related to the transformation of the system of museum management. At least we will try to reinforce the presence of scientific community, scientific public there, by some specific tools and specific functions of the supervisory board, which are absolutely natural for many museum institutions of the world. So we're considering this process as a kind of a pilot process. We already have got some precedents, in particular positive precedents. And for example, the supervisory board of the Ukrainian Cultural Fund as a component of management. And we have already gone through a period of discussion, so to say, which is important. And hopefully we will launch the supervisory board of the Ukrainian Cultural Fund in the nearest future, and that will give us the understanding of how we could generally engage the public in the right way in the life and activity of cultural institutions. Well, the supervisory board of the Ukrainian Book Institute is not that good in terms of its quality, but at least it provides some of the ideas as to how we could be managing cultural institutions, which are the main tools in the implementation of cultural policy of the country. And here is another point I would like to mention. And if Mykyta does get offended, I would like to start a discussion with him. And I want to support Halina Grigorenko, who said that we really need to engage people from the ministries, other ministries, people from the Ministry of Education. We need to train people, not just restoration agents, because, challenges of the war make us think that we need to start training our restoration agents, some of whom have left, some of whom have changed the direction of their activity, and those who are still here are afraid of doing those works, and they just start doing emergency and conservation works. But it's like the case with Karandeev. The bidding was announced there 3 times, and there was a specific scope of funding, but there was no applicant. And we also need to train not just restoration agents, but museum workers and managers, because we are talking about higher education institutions who are training professional managers in the field of cultural heritage. Do we have anybody training such people? Well, I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't say so. Well, we have some departments, like the philosophy department, the Department of Cultural Studies in Kyiv University. We have some academies that are training some of such people, but we don't have a systemic approach to training of people like this in one institution or several higher educational institutions. And we also need to train cultural actors, because we're talking about popularization of cultural heritage. We actually don't have such opportunities. And Julia, concerning the cultural aspects, you've been absolutely right in saying that we need to introduce the notion of cultural teaching or cultural pedagogy. And culture is not just supposed to provide some entertainment for people to see what other people did 1,000 years ago. It's also about education and upbringing. And we are talking about this aspect that should be in the focus of our attention. And with this in view, we will need to engage all representatives from the Ministry of Education, because they work with schools, they work with curricula, and then taking into account our greatest base of artifacts, they can actually start ensuring this educational component in the educational system of Ukraine. Yeah, we also have some colleagues online, so we are very much welcome with your remarks and comments. And as far as I understand, it is first focused on then Kolesnikov, so you're welcome. Yes, good afternoon to everyone. Welcome at this event. Congratulations. And let me get back to conceptualization, because this is a very interesting topic. I'm a member of the board of the Union of Architects and the coordinator of Kyiv Strategic Community. So as far as conceptualization is concerned, it seems to me that we should set the right priorities in terms of cultural heritage protection. And some priorities have changed, but we need to talk about the right setting of the priorities and using the resources in the right way. It seems to me that we are talking more about the resources, but, you know, this is at the same time an asset. And by the way, I think that the ministry should develop a proposal on the development of cultural heritage. Once I develop this proposal, so maybe the older version of it's there. So I know that now there is a special group developing the new city planning code, and they have a special group focusing on cultural heritage. So I think that at least this group should also be engaged, because it has interesting ideas, and I think that they could help you with the discussion of the items that you are discussing today. So this is my first suggestion. And the other suggestion is related to the information on this process as such in the whole. We have too few people from mass media engaged in protection of cultural heritage. So I think that we should have wider publicity for this issue. It should be well articulated, it should be principled and voiced at all possible levels. Thank you.
Колеги, з вашого дозволу ще одна учасниця з онлайну, пані Ольга Сагайдак. Будь ласка, пані Ольга.
Вітаю, колеги. Теж хотіла би почати з
Colleague
ремарки. У нас 30
from online. I would like to start with a remark. So many scientific institutions provide diplomas in the sphere of culture, so we have a lot of people with diploma, but we do not have enough experts. I would like to say that I am heading Eric's Paul project, which is financed by the European Commission, and I would like to propose that from the very beginning we need to synchronize the initiatives of UNESCO and the European Commission, not to create competition in this field. It would be a very important initiative of the Ministry of Culture, as well as the committee of Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada, to create a platform that would be joining similar initiatives. And we will see that certain questions are covered.
Хотіла зазначити, в 21-му році ми з паном Микитою зустрічалися з приводу закону
I would like to mention that in 2021 we have met with Mykyta, and there was a proposal that has been elaborated by a working group at the ministry. This legislative bill was ready to be registered with the parliament, and we were discussing that we need a feedback from European experts, and a few days ago the European Commission in Brussels has approved the law on the moving of cultural heritage, and the experts are very keen on helping us and synchronizing with the European legislation, and the platform of counteraction has to be made in the way that the European colleagues are included. Thank you very much. That are good news, Oda. Thank you. You see, there is one more additional law, but we all have to agree with it. Despite the presence of the approval, I remember it. It was good, in my opinion. Yes. Larissa, yes, I can see, but I do not see the table again. So let's do it in the given order. You can hear me, yes? Emila Belimova from the Crimean Institute of Strategic Studies. Except for cultural projects, we also follow the violation of international laws on occupied territories. And as of today, it's not only the Crimean territory, but of separate regions which are occupied in Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Luhansk, and Donetsk regions. I have 2 or 3 proposals to make it brief. First of all, I think we are lacking, except for the stakeholders mentioned before, we lack here the attorney's office and the investigative authorities, because our experience says that as of today, they see all the gaps that are present in the field of punishment for the corresponding crimes. And I believe that our legislation creates a situation when the punishment for the crime doesn't correspond with the severity of the crime. I can tell you about my personal pain. I believe I have been annoying some people with this question, but in a conditional situation, let's just dream we deoccupy the territory. Which punishment will a director of a museum get for a destroyed monument? From 3 to 5 years of prison? Will it be a responsibility for what a person has done? So it is very important to speak with the attorney's office and with the attorneys general. And we need to synchronize the actions of public organizations, of the government, because we planned this year, and you know it. Ukraine is celebrating, if you can call it like that, the anniversary of joining the Hague Convention of 1954 and of the second protocol, which is connected to, directly linked to the warfare. And we plan to be working with the legislative initiatives. And from the point of view that Ukraine has unique experience as of today, I don't know even how to call it. I mean, like overcoming this crisis situations and challenges, and I believe Ukraine can become a good expert as of today from the point of view on how international law can be improved. And this international law as of today has shown its complete incapability. It's a pity, but the current system, legal system, has shown that it is not ready to work under current conditions. So to synchronize our initiatives, and for the colleagues who are next to me, I want to say that we all are very skeptical to many initiatives, and I'm telling it to myself too. Because starting with 2016 was my experience, because till 2016 I have been in Crimea for certain reasons. Multiple times we started these talks. Let's start doing something. But maybe it is also our Ukrainian peculiarity to be talking about the problem but doing nothing more. And for myself, that is like a bit of advice, a piece of advice. And if somebody listens to me and hears to me, let's just stop talking about the problem. Because I am sure that all people present here, the majority of them, for them, the cultural heritage are not just words. That is something they are living. There is the thing of the entire life in there. So let's take away the skepticism and try to do something that we feel all a little bit better because of it. I completely share everything that you have said, especially the last sentence. We are very interested in practical things. We want to get a corpus juris, that we have transparent wording, that when you read it, then you understand everything, that you do not need to have a law degree to understand these laws. It's a pity, but it's not always happens like to 100% according to the criteria from my personal experience, but we tend towards it. That is why this project is not just about talking, it's about getting wording that will solve the particular problems. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. Larissa, please. Thank you. Greetings to everybody. I'm representing the public organization, the economic security sector, and I would like to speak about the economic security and national security. If we speak about the protection of cultural heritage, material and non-material, like language, traditions, values, which joins us as a community, we need to pay attention to the fact that in the law on national security, there is a term, a notion of national security and threat to national security, because there is also a term like national values of Ukraine. And in this aspect, we can solve half of the questions that have been voiced by the people speaking prior to me. For example, to amend the Article 12 of the law on national security by adding the Ministry of Culture and Informational Policy and Sector of Defense, because it really needs to be added, because that is the ministry that is responsible for the spiritual development for national values, which belong to the national safety. And very important is the topic of synchronizing the Ukrainian legislation. If we pay attention, we will see that all the documents of European Union, NATO, and International Criminal Court they always look into the protection and preservation of cultural heritage as the state unity and the entire European community. This will also solve the question of attracting specialists from other ministries if we offer to improve the state policies, to fill them, to add the competence of identity, national identity, because also the symbolical policies.
Якщо ми будемо дивитися на це з точки зору охорони культурної спадщини, збереження культурної спадщини і місії взагалі Міністерства культури та
as well as preserving the cultural heritage from the point of view of forming national values, I believe that the question of existence of such structure as the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy and financing or not financing the culture will be dissolved. Thank you. First of all, your neighbor and then you, okay? Good afternoon, Irina Prokopenko, Director of the Ukrainian Institute of Cultural Heritage. My first question, I completely agree with Elmira. We have a lot of initiatives. We have been working a lot together. Now, I know that the law on the targeted state programs has been deblocked. And I have the desire that we continue working not just in different spots and think of a state program not for 5 years, but for 25 years, that we include the entire inventarization, that we have the entire understanding of the inventory of all property that we possess of. Because we do not have it, we have additional legislative norms that are being changed, and the material cultural heritage needs to be documented. The protection zones, I'm speaking about archaeology, for example. We also have a critical situation that they are not fully having everything they need, I mean documentation. I do not know the percentage, I cannot say exactly, but very low number is having such documentation. And the lack of the documents leads to manipulation. It is at most critical situation that needs to be discussed, and taking into account the warfare, it has to be financed from state sources, from grant money, from all other possible sources. I'm not a finance expert, I cannot tell you exactly. And taking into account the changes of legislation, but unless we have the understanding in the society that will be properly educated, there will be no legislative norm that would be carried out in the field of protecting heritage. And I completely agree with Rostislav that an educational program has to be part of it. I cannot agree more because today I started my workday in China. In Kitaev. For those who do not know, it's a unique archaeological heritage site. And on the example of this site, you can build a case for something you are talking about now, for an entire presentation. And what I'm trying to say, we have a lot of successful pilot ideas, and nobody can say that we here in Ukraine do not know how to make successful projects, but they are always stopping on the pilot level. We have very successful changes of transferring clubs to educational centers for communities. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but that were pilot projects. We have unique experience. And how many libraries? Many more. Yeah, we have also like unique experience of creating a very modern museum around an archaeological site that is the ancient Zvenigorod Museum. How many museums do we have? But how many heritage sites do we have like that? Yes? In my opinion, practical experience, we have enough in Ukraine of it. And we need to take, I understand that it will be like a little bit, you will feel like it is a simplification or what, but you need to take the European experience, the international legislation, and using the experience gathered in Ukraine in each field of culture, because we have it everywhere, and in symbiosis with the international practices and European practices, we will receive our own suitable for our conditions working legislation in the field of culture. You know, I understand that it is very complicated work to do, and it sounds like just simply when I'm speaking about it, but that is what I'm trying to stress upon. We have all the components. And that is why we are gathered here today. You, please. Sahishian, the director of the Department of Culture of Kyiv City Administration. I wanted to state that it is a very important meeting and very important questions are being discussed here, but what I would like to say, I would like to support Elmira because she wonderfully said about the responsibility. Concerning the protection of the cultural heritage, maybe my colleague will tell, but the legislation in Ukraine on protecting the heritage is not that bad. But if we open our online auctions, I have just checked like recent updates, 4th, 6th century archaeological findings, and you start like with 300 hryvnia up to 1500, yes? You can freely buy it and sell it. When we had like a similar meeting online, there were law enforcement present, and the result we can see now, nothing has changed. As the cultural heritage has been traded, it continues to be traded. And what concerns the legislation, yes, indeed, we need to create it, but that is a long-lasting process. We need to concentrate our efforts in the decrees by the central executive bodies that they have the enforcement for general public. And I would like to say thank you to Sviatoslav for the previous talk we had, and the committee is preparing the proposals for the libraries, for the museums. But at most important is that we have the decree by the Cabinet of Ministers that regulates this order. And with the regulation that is enacted, they do not correspond to each other. And you need to pay attention to it. Because as of today, it looks like everybody is responsible, but actually nobody is responsible. Thank you. I agree with you. This will be definitely one of our priorities, because I know certain negative cases from museums, for example, in Kherson, that we understand not during the occupation, when the museum was freed already, liberated. Certain collections were hidden, or have been saved from being robbed, but then they needed to be evacuated because the conditions of their preservation were unsuitable. I'm not going to speak about certain names of museums, but there were bombings, shellings, and so on. So restoration is needed and storage is needed. But we all know it very well. There is Ihor. I do not see his last name. He's online, so I would like him to speak. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. I'm the director of the Maidan Museum and the coordinator of the Initiative of Saving Heritage. Thank you for this meeting. We have heard a lot of wonderful ideas, but what is most important for us today? The war is ongoing, and all the problems of the cultural sphere are not solved, and we need to remember that we need to pay attention to the situation. We need to create the system of rapid response, because when we continue talking about 10-year plans and defining what cultural heritage is, and it has been already defined in our legislation, in international law, by UNESCO in particular, we are not allowed to forget that we are losing our cultural heritage. We are losing our cultural capital because the war is ongoing. And Oda has mentioned the European Commission. I am member of the working group of the European Commission. And there are also a few of my colleagues from Ukraine, and we have prepared the recommendation on international level, on the national level, on local level, and we need to take this recommendation, which has to become a tool for Ukraine. What Serhiy has mentioned, that Interpol, Europol, FBI, specialized criminal investigative authorities that work in the field of heritage, they state about extremely high levels of movement of cultural property from the territory of Ukraine, especially these days. We need to create criminal police like Carabineers in Italy, and similar police is present in many countries of the world. We need to fully implement the Hague Convention. We need to attract the Ministry of Defense and the military as our partners, at least as CMP units. What is also very important is to solve the problems of evacuation and coordination of different bodies. This year, with the support of UNESCO, we had a workshop in Odessa, and it was aimed at a certain analysis of actions in emergency situation. This algorithm is present. We can provide it to the committee of the Verkhovna Rada. There are a lot of interesting ideas. But remember how it was like 2 years ago. Analyze what was well done and what was wrong. Because Ukraine has gathered a lot of unique experience on all levels. On the level of the state government, on the level of on the local level, how to react to emergencies. We need to analyze it. Because we need our allies in protection of heritage, not only in the face of the Ministry of Culture, not only on culture, heritage protection bodies in the regional administrations, but we need a rapid response system, jointly with the State Emergency Service, with law enforcement, with NGOs. And Ukraine has unique experience, and we have already formed best practices in the non-governmental sector that only support the efforts of the government in this field. We just need decent cooperation and further actions. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Marina Solovyova. Department of Protection of Cultural Heritage of the Kyiv City State Administration. The first sentence, I would like to support Yevgenia Kravchuk, who mentioned the Nicosia Convention of 2017. I believe that it is a very important document that concerns the issues of heritage protection. And it says that if 5 countries ratify it, 3 of these countries will be European Council members. Hungary has ratified it in 2022. Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine has to ratify it too. Then we will have the opportunity to return the goods stolen by Russia to Ukraine. That is the thesis number 1, which is very important. And secondly, we can punish for crimes against cultural heritage. I would like to ask you, it is extremely important. Then we can make changes and amendments to the criminal code. We can strengthen the punishment for crimes against the cultural and historical heritage. Previously, the Bill 8202 has been provided, which has stipulated, I would like to remind to everybody, increasing of fines in the field of cultural heritage protection. For physical persons, it is 1,700 hryvnia. For legal persons, it is 17,000 or 170,000. What are the fines for violation of cultural heritage laws? If we are speaking about a complete destruction of a cultural site, there is a possibility of buying the cultural heritage sites from undecent, not caring owners to the communal property, and also increasing the responsibility, criminal responsibility for the crimes against the cultural heritage. This law has been voted for in the first reading, but then the constitution of the parliament has changed. And as I understand this question, from the Ministry of Culture, there was a letter sent stating that this law is not needed. For now, the Department of Cultural Heritage Protection has worked upon this document, and we ask you kindly to pay attention to it. I had a look on it. Colleagues, we need to finish because we have 2 minutes left. I am sorry I'm not giving the word to everybody. I'm really sorry for that. 1 minute. Because Bogdan is head of our public council of our committee. It is not that bad with our current legislation in the field of cultural heritage protection. The laws are working, but adhering to the laws has been always a big problem that existed forever. We have started a very important thing, the synchronization with the European legislation, wonderful thing, but we should not forget about the important things where we are working. We need some changes there. And very good that Yevgenia Kravchuk has mentioned and reminded about it, that there has been hearings in the archaeological committee, and there were a lot of laws proposed to improve the state of archaeology. And thirdly, we have a very big problem with the law 5655, which is already a law not signed by the president yet, but it can be signed at any moment. And the Europeans have helped us once that the president was afraid to sign it. Thanks a lot to ICOMOS for that. It was real cooperation. And I think that if he is constantly reminded that the law should not be signed, it will die one day somewhere in the presidential office. Marina, I have looked into the law you mentioned. It has been resubmitted to the parliament. We need to have a look on it again. Let's not lose it at this table. Put all the documents that we have here, that we just do not lose it here. Dear colleagues, I'm grateful to everybody of you. I'm sorry that I could not provide the possibility to speak to everybody. And I'm kindly asking you, the proposals for those who were not able to speak today, please send it to the email address. I'm grateful to our partners, to Chiara, to everybody. Let's continue our work. Goodbye.